to tell you I'm starting recording. Okay, I've started recording. Welcome to the CEFACT Global Trust Registry project meeting. This is the sort of second of these two meetings we have quite close to each other. I'm speaking to you from Melbourne, Australia. My name is John Phillips. I'm a co-lead of this project. And with the last meeting we had in my time zone was 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon. And this is happening at 10 o'clock on the following day, on the Friday, the 11th of July. And we have a small group of people here. I'll name them because it might be easier for people, but it's Joe Spencer, my co-founder and great friend, and Lucy Yang, who I also think was a great friend, but also is extremely experienced in this area. So great to have you here with us, Lucy. I will quickly go through the kind of agenda. This is the agenda we used yesterday. And for this meeting, I propose to be quite kind of focused, and it doesn't need to take all of the 50 minutes, but we'll kind of drill down the things that were interesting to talk to. So we had probably about a dozen people participating in yesterday's meeting. The code of conduct is the same for all of the projects under CEFACT. This is a standard code of conduct. And on this slide, I've embedded both the kind of code of conduct messages, but also a bit about the intellectual property rights. And there are some links about those. But fundamentally, CEFACT projects are intended to produce open standards, open recommendations, non-proprietary, no royalties and fees associated with them, and that's the kind of ethos of the project. The agenda that was run through yesterday was, after a quick kind of representation I just did of code of conduct, we had some introductions from new participants. So for Joe was on the call, so he saw these people arrive, but several of the people you met in Geneva were on the call. A lot of fairly strong Spanish representation. We also have people like Dima Postnikov, who leads some of the work here in Australia on Connect ID, which is a banking initiative, a bank-sponsored initiative. Alina went through the Geneva meetings. We'll look at those quickly, and that's probably a good point to get your feedback as well, Lucy. We then went into the sort of project deliverables and what the work is to be done and how to help. And then we had a range of discussions. And I'll repeat the kind of questions that came up and one that's come up since on my kind of WhatsApp feed, just again for the record. These are the Geneva slides. Now, Joe, you saw these yesterday, and Lucy, you saw them in person, so I won't dwell too long on them. You can, if you wish, listen to how Alina went through them yesterday, as she sort of explained where they were used. She explained the two conferences that she was at in Geneva last week, the Global Digital Collaboration Conference, which is on the first 2 days of the week, effectively, and then the plenary for CEFACT, which was on the sort of last 2 days, more or less, of the week. And these slides were presented at GDC and sort of partly, in a sense, presented for the plenary, or the plenary actually had a specific deck. So she went through the wills and won'ts. I'm beginning to feel for the project this is actually quite important, that we might sort of declare these to be sort of principles or something for the project and make them sort of front and center of the work it does, so that people don't get concerned that we're creating a whole new, undermining existing business initiatives or existing kind of sovereign state programs and so on. That's entirely not what we want to do. So we're trying to sort of stay clear to this sort of path of recognizing what exists and helping people find the authoritative source of what exists, without undermining anything that is already done or changing what is already done. You'll see in here there's a few, I'll do this little highlight. There's a little bit about sort of Spanish details. That CRU and property registry came up in a conversation later, and I'll share that question because it's quite kind of interesting in a chat between myself and Alina. Alina is, by the way, the registrar for Spain for land assets and a lawyer background. So she has a very good understanding about how registries work and indeed how legal frameworks work. One of the things that clarifies what the project is about is this sort of list of things that we're going to be interested in. That list comes from supply chains. So several of the people that participate are very experienced in the sort of trust frameworks to do with digital identity and personal agency and credentials associated with people. And those are very important, and they will come to play in any commercial environment at a point in time. But for our initial focus on this project, we're looking at those things that are kind of the concrete elements of typically bills of material and invoices and bills of lading and the stuff that sort of the grease that lets the wheels of supply chains move. That's the kind of stuff we're looking at, which requires authoritative business sort of registries of stuff, like the organizations and the land and the assets and trademarks and so on. So less about the people, more about the things. The point that Alina does particularly well is to sort of talk to the idea of this legal jurisdictional basis for the kind of registries we're interested in. And I know there's a conversation you and I were having, Lucy, around the sort of trust frameworks and trust registries. And there's actually a very useful way of thinking about them that is potentially notwithstanding a legal framework. But for our purposes here, we're looking at sort of sovereign nation states of the UN and the frameworks they set up, which inevitably have a kind of legal basis upon which they're established. We are thinking about, and I'll highlight this area here, we've kind of inherited this title of the project, the Global Trust Registry, and it's an interesting title. It creates lots of people's interest. It sometimes leads people down the wrong path of thinking, and we're considering ways, we'll probably have some sort of process by which we consider what the name of the system that this project might recommend is created could be called. So think of the project having a Global Trust Registry project, but the project is going to recommend a system is run or created that has a name. And that name, for example, could be the authoritative register directory, which would be CARD if you had CEFACT in front of it. But that sort of idea is what we're playing with. So it wouldn't be called the Global Trust Registry because that might confuse. It might be called something else. I'm going to pause for a second and ask Lucy, does that make sense to you that we would want to call it something different than GTR?
I think I get what you're trying to do. Let's just, yeah, I don't have any comments for now.
It's okay, that's fine. And then there's this logical model, which I'll go back to in a second, about how to understand it. And in fact, I might do it right now since it's up here. I put this upon Alina when she went to Geneva. She was asking for some slides and we were toing and froing while she was sort of traveling. So this was something that she had to sort of in real time sort of respond to. That what I'm trying to represent here is this idea of existing kind of frameworks of trade. So these, I'll make this bigger here. So this is a sort of supply chain simplification of a supply chain where we've got mining operations, processing operations, fabrication, and then assembly kind of as 4 different pillars. And we've got the idea that each of these is in a different jurisdiction and that there's a sort of registry authority that registers the participants in that jurisdiction. So the miners that are operating, say, in a mine in Canada, the processing plant that's operating in, I don't know, Vietnam, the assembly plant that's operating in Thailand, or whatever. This sort of idea that each of these participants might be in a different jurisdiction. They're registered with an authoritative registry, and that's the sort of normal state of play right now. And what the project is drawing up is this idea of this thing, this colorful wheel, of course, in the standard sort of UN style of colors and wheels. The idea that in addition to what exists currently, we might want to have a registry of those authoritative registrars so that a relying party up here, say, could check to see not only is what's being supplied to them from a supplier that they can find in a registry, but they can check that that is in fact the authoritative registry for that jurisdiction. And if they follow the UNTP, United Nations Transparency Protocol thinking, they can go further back upstream and find out more about the participants of the suppliers to their supplier. So then I think Alina went through the sort of the more technical discussions around the digital identity anchor, and this is one of the main streams of work. So there's sort of 2 broad areas of work for the project. One is on the sort of, let's call it the governance framework, about who might become a registry, recognized registry inside the UN CEFACT registry, and what kind of criteria might there be for that. And then the other part of it is sort of how might we make the data somehow universally accessible or verifiable or trustworthy? What recommendations might we give? And this idea of a digital identity anchor originally was framed in the UNTP program of work. And what they've highlighted for this project is that we might need to think more about this as to how that might work across multiple different registries and multiple different registry types, all of whom may have existing bodies of work that they're doing. So that's the sort of the challenge we face. And in this slide, we're sort of talking about how that idea of an authority that gives an identity anchor might work. So we're all familiar on this call, at least, with the idea of a digital product passport. It's going to become, well, it is a legal requirement that will be enacted by 2030 in Europe, and it's a requirement for some products already, like batteries. There's a specific standard and regulations in Europe for that particular construct. But the idea of a digital product passport is universal, if you like. It extends beyond Europe's borders. And the idea would be that inside such a construct, you'd want to have various claims and assertions about the products, including who made it, and some basic identity information and some other attribute information about the product. And what we're saying here is that if you want to prove that that in fact is the supplier, and that supplier is a legal entity recognized in an authority, you need to sort of follow up through another path to say, okay, you do actually have a registered identity with an authority, and I can check digital product passport has been signed by that same entity. So that's the sort of path we're following here. There were some other points that were made later in the day. So at this point in the discussion yesterday, I think it was at this point, Lucy, but you're actually in these meetings. There was a question asked when Alina and Steve and others were on the panel from the floor about how might you handle the situation where, and I have to go back a couple of slides, where, say, in countries like Europe, there are many registries of businesses, and in even that's the case here in Australia. We have one central registry, ASIC, but there are projects that are trying to assimilate in Australia up to 36 kind of types of business registries that are struggling to do so. But in other words, there's sort of more complexity under the surface. So that was one of the questions. How might we handle it where a jurisdiction has a sort of complex landscape of registries? My quick response to that yesterday was, in a sense, that's their own affair and their own problem. We can't solve the problems of countries by recognizing what they already have. Of course, it would be simpler if Germany had one consolidated view of which companies are registered in Germany. But in a way, that's Germany's problem to solve. There are other examples of systems that have a way of solving it, like Glyph and LEIs and VLIs, where they've established local operating units that actually recognize the registration processes of Germany. And for us, that would be okay. If Germany says we recognize the VLI and the Glyph system as a faithful representation of what we've registered, then that could be part of our UN CEFACT directory as well. So if I'm not sure I'm making this very clear, but we're not trying to fix the problems of individual countries and the complexity, but to recognize what they have and recommend how they might make it simpler. It's not for us to say you can or can't do these things. We can't enforce things. We have no authority over countries. We can only make recommendations. So if I go now to these two links, let's see if I can click it. Cool. So the one that's important, and I think you were actually live in the audience when this was happening, is the recommendation 49, and I think, is this the one that's going to talk about that? Yes, so there was a run through by Alina of the outcome of the discussion on recommendation 49. The long story short kind of version is that the recommendation is approved subject to some changes to the draft that was presented at the plenary. The draft presented at the plenary had an annex which included a fairly detailed description of the United Nations Transparency Protocol. That annex won't be in the final version. And the remaining sort of text more or less stays as it is, with some explicit references to UNTP removed if they're in the body. But the idea, if you like, of UNTP is supported by the recommendation still. So that I hope will come out in a couple of weeks, subject to whatever processes are required to go through the sort of updates to the document. But if you look for the version of the recommendation 49 now, you'll see the one with the annex in it, and that will be subsequently replaced by a version without that annex in it. Lucy, I'm paraphrasing a little. Is that more or less what you've heard as an outcome from the plenary?
I prefer not comment on record if you don't mind. Okay.
No, that's cool. That's cool. That's no, I respect that. That's fine. And then I guess we went into this little, so this was where I went back in. So by up to now, Alina had been talking. I went back in again here and sort of walked through this model. And what I didn't say, I guess, is if you're looking at this on a color screen or on a screen that's sizable enough, Joe's walking, I think, with his phone, then there are blue lines, brownish colored lines, and green lines, and they have slightly different meanings. So the blue lines are trade, the green lines are registration, and the kind of brownie colored lines are verification. What we've done is to highlight for the project where the deliverables sort of fit. So we had a set of deliverables as part of the program scope when the program was approved back in January. And we've kind of, as any people that have been tapped on the shoulder to lead a project, you try to make sense of what you've inherited and sort of how does it all fit in and why. And so this is my making sense effort. So I've highlighted the deliverables that we're going to be producing and sort of shown where they fit into this sort of idea of the model. So the one that Lena's been working on, which I'll show you shortly, is this eligibility requirements to be met by registries. So whilst we want to be as open a door as we can be, in other words, whatever a country says they've got is kind of obviously what they've got. If our aim is to establish a trustworthy base for commerce, for trade, then there need to be certain levels of kind of quality, I suppose, that are met by that registry. And some of the simple fundamental ones are, is there a legal basis for the registry? Does it have a definition in law in that country as to what that registry represents and what the meaning is for things like liability and so on? Is there a governance process for that registry that you can point to that explains how governance is performed when companies are onboarded and offboarded and under what conditions and so on? So these sort of attributes are things that help gain confidence in the processes of registry. There needs to be sort of a minimal entry requirement, but obviously countries will have differing levels of sophistication, and we don't want to make the gap so narrow that countries can't get in that need to be part of the because every country in the world is trading, so that there is obviously trade across all borders, and therefore we don't want to sort of make it too hard to get into the directory of authoritative registries. But so that's what Alina's working on, and there's a lot of legal text inside that. We need to think about what kind of data we're interested in about registries. In other words, the metadata, if you like. What is it that the registry records? What kind of data structures does it use for those things that it records? What, if any, verification does it provide for those data records from an online point of view? Is there like an API? Is there something published? What legal basis is there for the registry? And can you point to a legislative framework that supports this registry? So this sort of metadata, if you like, about the registry, none of which, of course, is the actual content of the registry. So we're not actually listing the things they've registered. We're not creating a shadow directory system. We're only pointing to the source. We'll need to, if this is to proceed, give recommendations as to how this might run. And obviously there are systems that already run by the UN that include things like ICAO and the PKD, the passport system. There are lessons to be learned about how those systems run, how they're funded, how they're governed. And we kind of we'll have to make recommendations about how such a registry, a directory of registries might work. We'll need to consider, this is the digital identity anchor piece, we'll need to consider how the data might be verified, what formats it might be. And there are existing world initiatives on open kind of wrapper type identity structures. So there's a RFC, I think, on GLU, GLU, and there are others that are looking at how we might kind of provide a universal resolver kind of approach. So rather than saying to a registry, you have to change your structures, which is going to be very difficult to compel people to do, how might we accommodate different data structures that exist, and how might we make sense of those? And the fifth thing here is this idea that there'll be two pilots to test prove that the ideas that are recommended actually work. What we've got so far is a directory of these documents. The numbers of these documents refer back to those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers here, and each of these is at the moment a Google Doc, because that was felt to be easier to work with initially than, say, putting it all into GitHub and using Markdown and pull requests and forks and stuff. We might still move to GitHub. I sense that might happen, but at the moment we're on a Google environment. And I think that was where I jumped to the questions, because we had quite a few live questions yesterday. Yes, it was. But what I will do now is I'll show you, for your interest, Lucy, this is the directory of, it's just a Google folder, right? With each of these files. And the idea, if we open one of them, is firstly, I'm being as lazy as I can be, but probably no lazier. So each of these has much the same structure. It inherits things like this diagram. So if I change that diagram, all the documents have a different diagram in the front of them. This about the project is inherited text. So basically, if there's one place to write an update to this, and then the 5 documents get updated. Similarly, I'll scroll down here. So there is one glossary list, and that if that glossary list is updated, then all the documents get a new glossary list. It's just me being lazy. We're going to use the standard structures for recommendations, so the must not, required, shalls, and so on from RFC 2119 and 8174. And then we get into the guts of what it is. So the process that we're following is Alina's drafted most of these to begin with. So she's come up with legal and institutional requirements, public authority and statutory basis. So she's got a legal background. And I've just gone through here just to say, okay, let's assume each requirement should be numbered for the ease of reference and editing and so on. And given the sort of structure to this numbering process, Alina's come up with the thinking that says, what are the legal and quality kind of requirements? And that is what we want to kind of go through the public review process with and collaboration with on this sort of thing for this document. The same is going to be true for the others. So on yesterday's call, we had people like Alex from Checked, and we also had others that are heavily involved in the sort of identity and trust framework development, and they were quite interested in the digital identity anchor data formats and structures and use. And I was encouraging them to sort of, well, I'm looking for your participation on this particular discussion document and what the recommendations are that it comes up with. So, so basically, that's the sort of where we got to yesterday. The other question that I got last night may not be quite so directly interesting to you, Lucy, but it was about the property registry. And I need to understand when they use the word property, do they mean like a building or do they mean the ownership of something? Either could have a use in a supply chain. And their question was whether or not we need to consider the inclusion of that type of registry data in the digital identity anchor. I think the answer is going to be yes, because I think property can be both a quality of ownership of something, so a trademark or other such things, but it can also be a place, like a facility, which is being licensed or to do a particular function, to perform or produce a product, and that might therefore also require kind of property in the sense of a physical building or facility kind of thing. So I think we're going to say to the questioner that yes, in fact, that type of data will still be of interest to the project. And that's where we got up to, Lucy. So I've been wittering on. Now we had about a dozen or more people kind of coming in to the discussion yesterday. Other things that are sort of happening with the project is you saw maybe very briefly flash up here that there is a project environment that CEFACT promote the use of. It's based on Atlassian. It's called the Collaborative CEFACT Environment, CUE. It's a sort of cut down and very strongly guidelined environment. So it's a bit hard to work in. And the only way you can edit content is if you're a registered CEFACT participant. So if you're an expert and have a kind of login. So it makes it difficult for me at the moment with so few people yet through that process that I can't easily open the documents. But I also think I need to find the space people are most comfortable in working. And if that space isn't Atlassian, I need to be accommodating where they are happy to work rather than making it difficult. But nevertheless, there will be an up-to-date version of that project space that we have in CEFACT, such that people can find where we are and go to the places we're working. That was it. So thank you for joining us, Lucy.
Thank you for the rundown. That's really helpful. I missed the first part of the presentation at GDC, so kind of going through that was definitely helpful.
Okay. It's going to be. I mean, I will very much appreciate your active participation in this, because you've I know there's only some things you can and can't say, but a project like this has not just technical complexity, but it has a sort of sensitivity or awareness to how you get stakeholders to align with and support initiatives, and it's also quite possible to get people unintentionally kind of offside, as you might say in a sporting context, sort of unnecessarily think that you're challenging their initiatives. So we need to be as mindful as we can. One of the slides I have used in the past for this project is a kind of 3-phase project, where the first thing is to increase awareness of everything that's going on as best we can. And then the next thing is to recognize what's going on, or what it means, and what we can do about it. And then the last thing is to recommend. So given those things, so what do we recommend? And it's that sort of 3-phase process that I think overarches all of the work we're doing in the project. And the awareness needs to be kind of constant. It's not once and done. We have to keep our eyes open to what else is going on all the time.
As mentioned, before, I'm trying to juggle a bunch of stuff, but I can share a few thoughts just based on what you just shared. I will start with your question earlier about my reflection on GDC. I think it's going to be relevant to my later comments, and also kind of it's quite late in the year, so I may not be very structured with my comments, but I will try.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest impression I had on GDC, and also the biggest takeaway for me, is really bringing different sectors, like different use cases of credentials, because not all of that is digital identity, right? We have foundational identity system, we have functional identity, and also we have really kind of domain use cases that are all kind of leveraging similar or same trust infrastructure and standards and technology, right? It was really amazing to see like people working on different areas of the problems coming together and being able to kind of connect and learn from each other. And as you know, like my work is not in just one domain. Like I've worked in health and I call it now aviation, a little bit on trade since this year. And I've been following education, I've done, finance use cases, I've been trying to be everywhere, even though I know I can't be everywhere. But what I'm trying to learn as a business person is really, I want to see the patterns, right? What are the patterns that succeed? What are the patterns that don't work that well? And one thing that I've learned, because I also work on, credentialing and trust registry and meta registry. So all these kind of project I've done. And one kind of thing that I've seen come again and again is if businesses or if entities are not issuing credentials yet, they don't think about trust registry. If they're actually not doing trust registry, meta trust registry, meta registry is even further away. I remember on one of our calls, a few weeks ago, I mentioned there's a kind of a government kind of bidding that I was involved in. They were used to have like 2 components. One component is issuance platform. Another component is the trust registry, right? And they ended up saying that they're going to move forward with the issuance platform, but not the trust registry for now, which makes sense, right? Because if you don't have credentials, if you don't have enough stakeholders to issue credentials, what's the point of investing in a trust registry? Doesn't mean it's not something that they don't care about, they don't want to invest in. It's just something that it's hard for them to think about, especially given limited resources, right? And so that's one thing. So another thing is the logical model is I'm very familiar with that model, because that's I believe we started collaborating the Good House Pass, right? Interoperability blueprint. One of the big things that came out of it, which I kind of carried on at Linux Foundation Public Health, was really the meta registry, that idea, right? And then that project moved over to UNDP. That's how I got to collaborate more closely with UN agencies, particularly WHO, right? And so the model is pretty much the same. And also, I believe you're familiar with the GAIN project, which kind of evolved into City Hub, right? And there's IRA, what they're doing, and Jobin keep talking about our work in the COVID time, which the idea of a matter registry, and then they're doing it now at IRA. And I'm not too much involved in IRA, but at least in also in the education area, I've seen a lot of trust registry work going on. Not matter registry yet, just trust registry. And the Digital Credential Consortium, they've been in the community for a long time, but only recently they start looking at moving from their proprietary registry into a standardized registry, which is OpenID Federation, right? So like and what you talk about, like all the metadata aligning, all this kind of like what are like the minimum requirement. These are the conversations that I remember having with all the key COVID credential stakeholders like 2-3 years ago. And I believe I shared with you, and I can share again if you don't have it. Like we had a governance consultation as part of UNDP. It's like engaging, like ICAO was there, WHO was there, blockchain was there, like a BCI, pretty much all, like European Union was there. Pretty much all the stakeholders who are already issuing COVID credentials, right, in production are all there. That's that, and the work is still going at UNDP, but I definitely see the challenges. And actually, I'll share with you the most recent kind of a communication we just put out in public. We're moving away from the communication about matter registry, because that doesn't register with with the stakeholders. It's because it's hard for them to think about it now, especially when the business the businesses that are participating in today's registrars don't even have the capabilities of issuing. Right, so this is something that I've seen, like repeated patterns, right? So I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just because I think we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing the needs. I think that it's good, right? The needs is definitely there. It's just a matter of how we go about it, right? And then one of the comments I made at the WHO session at GDC was how the government agencies who are all trying to tackle credentialing problem, trust problem, can actually leverage each other's trust infrastructure, leveraging each other experience, right? That's one thing I know you're planning to do, but it for this project, even I know it has more focus on trade. You already mentioned ICAO, you mentioned others, right? It's just how many of these projects how and also I think, and I actually had a call earlier today with some of the trade related stakeholders. You're talking about all these projects, how as a UN agency that can actually engage member states in so many different kind of areas that actually talking about it.
So I know. So those were fantastic. Thank you, Lucy. Fantastic words of advice. And yes, you're right. There are very, very strongly repeating patterns in I think that's a good thing. We're kind of learning. One of the hopes I have for this project is obviously, you're absolutely right. The vision, the end vision, is issuance of verifiable credentials and all this sort of wonderful things we know that can happen when we do this to, in fact, the legitimate holder of such a thing, the organizations or the people that represent them, and so on. Those are quite future-facing kind of things that are quite a way away, as you just described, for many registries to actually achieve. So my first ambition is to answer a very much simpler question, which is, and I'll make it kind of casual. Imagine I'm drinking a bottle of beer that claims to come from Spain, and I'm looking at this beer and it has the name of a manufacturer, and I want to know whether this manufacturer is actually a Spanish company. Where do I find that? And so the question I want to answer is, where do I find the authoritative registries of things that might come across in sort of trade and consumption and supply? Who is the authoritative register for a country, or the registers for a country? And that's I think the UN is in a good place to answer that question, because it's very sort of structure and foundation. And yes, there are then subsequent questions that are very, very enticing in terms of what they might offer us all from a sort of efficiency gain and trustworthiness gain about the use of verifiable credentials and so on. But if I can answer that first question, that's a good start, because right now there isn't a way to answer that first question. How do I find where can I go to find a list of the authoritative registers in each country that participates in the UN? And that, I think, will be a start, right? And I think there's some many other things.
Are you talking about there's no we don't need credentials, digital credentials?
To begin with, we don't need them. So my ambition, it's going to sound very dull almost, very should be easy to achieve, but I don't think it's going to be easy to achieve because nothing tends to be. But so my initial ambition is, when I said recognize what exists, it's to get so we know you know more than I do actually, but you know the way UN works and UN CEFACT and bodies in the UN work. The representative of the country that participates with the UN says, these are our registers of things that you're interested in, the business type things you listed, like land and business ID and assets and whatever. So they tell us, we get an authoritative source that tells us this is where our authoritative sources are for our country. Now, the next thing,
just a clarification question to make sure I get what you're saying. So are you saying that beer? I mean, are you linking that barcode on the beer to a authoritative issuer?
So we both know that there are technical ways we might use things like QR codes and resolution of VCs and DIDs and so on to sort of do these checks. Now, that's where I want to get to. But before I get there, I think I can still get somewhere useful, right? So the idea of whilst I've used this very casual idea of drinking a bottle of beer, most of this is to do with large-scale industrial enterprises receiving goods from suppliers and so on. So it's a much more sort of chunky kind of thing. But they want to be sure that a supplier that is promoting their goods or services, and they're considering whether they bring them on board as one of their suppliers, is legitimate. So maybe they've come from a country they don't often deal with, and they want to understand a bit more about the registration of companies in that country. Where do they go? So what I think the UN can do is help solve that question. Now, that's not yet the use of verifiable credentials and DIDs and so on, but that's where it goes to, hopefully. Oh, Marcus is coming now.
I have to think a little bit further about it. So yeah, I don't have any comments now.
That's okay, Lucy, but I just wanted to explain. Marcus, you've just joined us at the end. Lovely to have you.
Who is this? Hi, Marcus.
Hey guys, yes. I'm sorry today. As I didn't have it in my agenda, I'm just coming out from another call, but I'm gonna schedule it to be in these calls from now on.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. It'll be great to have you on board. And I know you were trying to talk with Lucy as well. Anyway, I won't try to recap the last sort of 47 minutes, but we are finishing. Lucy and I were talking about, in a sense, the ambitions for the project. Where do we want to go to with this Global Trust Registry project? So I was painting a very kind of low bar, I suppose, but I don't think it's an easy bar to get over, but a low bar of ambition to start with. We on this call, I think, are all familiar with the potential of technology to make kind of verifiable trade and authentication and other sort of cryptographically supported initiatives really kind of fly. My ambition to begin with is the first step, if you like, is just to know who are the authoritative sources for information in each country for things that are relevant to supply chains. So what is the registrar in Spain for a business ID? What is the registrar in Panama for a business ID? And for that registrar, what contact details and access points are there? How might a company find out about companies registered in Panama? Is there a website? Is there an API? Is there, and so there's whatever exists. So the first thing is to sort of do a painting of what exists, but that painting is painted by the countries themselves. So the registrars, the authorities of those countries sort of say, this is what we got. And then we write recommendations about, okay, that's cool. And this is what we could, if you choose, do going forward in terms of making things towards where we all share on this call, ideas about verifiable credentials and verification and transparency and so on. So that was my, I guess, closing stuff with Lucy just now. Does that make any sense, Marcus? I know I've rapidly said a lot of words.
Yes, it makes all sense. I have a question for you, John. That is, which existing standards or protocols or ways of working do you think we can take as reference to begin with? For example, in Europe, the regional trust list that they operate between countries, it follows the ETSI standard. I believe that that standard is extremely limited. See, it's extremely limited for the purpose of this global trust registry, but it's something that is existing and that the European countries use already. So, like that ETSI that I'm mentioning, do you see like that one and others as interesting starting points to consider?
I think it's a great question, and I think my answer is yes. We have to recognize what exists now, and then we have to give a good reason why there's a way to improve what exists. And I was talking with Lucy before about the caution we need to approach that recommendation process with. We don't want to get people offside, if you like, or unnecessarily thinking we're challenging things. So firstly, we recognize what exists. With its strengths and weaknesses, capabilities, whatever it is, we kind of catalog, if you like, what exists. And then we recommend what could exist, if you like, what could make it even better, what could make this a universal approach, and so on. And that's where I have this sort of two lower hurdle to get. Can I get an authoritative directory, if you like, of all the registries and how you can access them and what it means legally and all this stuff? And then secondly, what recommendations can we give that will actually make this even better than it is on a global basis? And that's the sort of second part of the sort of work.
I think that's the right approach. Yes. Good. So I'm ready to be useful for that. We have the call with we are going to have a call with Anika next Monday, probably Monday or Tuesday, and I'll try to see if I can join as part of the Spanish representation. And anyway, in any way, I will try to be helpful, like doing this initial evaluation of the things that are not ideal in the standards that are in place and the things that are ideal for the new digital age that is coming. So very excited about this initiative and ready to help.
Fantastic, Marco. So it's going to be great. So go, Lucy.
John, if you don't mind, I just want to a comment on ETSI. So Marco said the ETSI is working on updating the trust list and data model to support EIDAS 2.0. So I believe the draft will come out in the fall. So if because I was close in touch with some of the folks that work with ETSI, so I'll keep you posted of anything new that come out. And I believe this version will particularly focus on addressing some of the the verification, how trustless would work with wallets for verifications. Obviously, that's more on the personal identity side, and this product is more on trade side. But a lot of things we can still learn from ETSI. And another kind of update on ETSI is, and I've heard some international standard bodies are interested, particularly because the governments that are part of the standard body are interested in looking at extending ETSI beyond the use of the EU. So probably there will going to be, and ETSI is also kind of interested in supporting these efforts and creating international profiles based on ETSI, so that can support more non-EU focused use cases. So these are some kind of the things I've been hearing. I'll definitely keep this group updated about these as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lucy. No, that'll be great. And your participation will be great. And your application through Spain, I think, is a really good idea. They're obviously a very active participant. Alina Nicagales is extraordinarily relevant and good as a co-lead for this project because she does understand registries and operates one in Spain. So it will be good. And as Lucy suggested, there is actually the possibility for anybody to choose the country that they register through, which sounds a little bit strange, but we can do this. So if it turns out to be slow through one country and it's appropriate, you can choose the right country to go through and it'll be quicker. Cool. Well, each of these meetings has a recording. You joined us when we were still recording. So the notes are generated automatically by, of course, AI. I read those through and correct any typos and remove anything that's plainly wrong. They will become available on the calendar that you finally, I hope, have had access to, Marcus. So you'll see the previous events also have the minutes and the transcript, and the recording is available through each of the events in that calendar. So it's sort of the way it's linked by the Google system. So you can see those prior ones as well. There's only really been 3 sets of meetings. This is the 3rd set. The next one should be in 2 weeks' time.
Amazing. Thanks, John, for leading this.
No problem. It's great to have you both on the call. Yes, Lucy.
John, can I make a kind of one last comment on one of the documents you shared earlier? I remember you shared a document which already have some kind of the should and should not. I couldn't remember which one that was that. One, I don't know what the process was for that, to create a document and so far. But one thing for your consideration is, if you have some stakeholders line up, not this one, it's the legal one.
Oh yeah. Okay, that one.
Right, that document, right? If you already have stakeholder engagement for that document, great. If not, I would recommend kind of a start with aligning stakeholders on principles before you use the should not language, right? Because now, like, if you're presenting it to them, like, oh, are we already have something, right? And why were you asking our feedback, especially if they don't align with the must and should these languages, it will be
you're very right.
Throw some people off.
I think there's a need to. So I was showing the structure, Marcus, of these documents that I'm as most of us are actually as technologists. I hate doing the same thing twice. Right, so as soon as I have to do something twice, I start writing some software doing something that stops me having to do it twice. So these images are in every one of these 5 documents we're so far producing. This about the project is the same thing. Now, what I'm hearing from Lucy is really good advice, and what I might do, Lucy, is put the principles of the project kind of front and center of these documents, and then highlight that any text sort of that is being worked on is very much draft for discussion, non-normative at this moment, or whatever, sort of words that tell people these are just sort of ideas, they're for discussion, they're not in any sense a recommendation yet, and sort of try and prevent that. We have already got this text here that you're looking at, in a sense by definition is coming from the Spanish registrar. So this comes from the legal team around Elena Nicagales in Spain. So one of the stakeholders is already writing this text. It's not me. It's the Spanish registrar. I think your advice is very good, though, Lucy. That we need to be cautious not to put people offside if they already see a fairly mature set of language presented to them.
I'm pretty much recommending not using this one as an alignment document. You can have a separate document when you're aligning with stakeholders, but this one's still going to be helpful as the one of the key stakeholders can start laying out their thoughts, right? So this is
well, and this document ends up being one of the final deliverables. It's not in this state, but in the state it ends up with, it'll have some proposed rigor about the criteria for having registries accepted into the list that the CEFACT maintain. So anyway, that's really good advice. Thank you. And I will sort of work on I probably will create that principles document and that positioning document as a separate piece of the puzzle for everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, both of you. It's been fabulous. And good to see you again, Marcus, and great to hear again from you, Lucy.
Good.
Yeah.
Have a good one,
Likewise.
everyone.
Thank you.
Too, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Marcos. Bye. Thank you, John.